Okay. Well, thanks for coming, guys. So today is the first meeting of what we're calling the Wealth Group, and the intention here is to share knowledge about wealth, building wealth through real estate investing, and the idea is that we should be able to create other real estate investors within the office and build a knowledge base that you can take and use with your clients. More importantly, should use for yourselves. And I mean, at the very least, at least by attending today, with the personal financial statement, you should know more about it and be able to talk more intelligently with potential clients or even bankers, or maybe when it comes to just getting a regular home loan, you'll be more educated about it. So what we'll start out with is what it looks like. So in paper format, it ends up being this 4-page document, and this is just one version of a personal financial statement. If you Google that, personal financial statement, you'll get, I mean, hundreds if not thousands of different options, and this happens to be one from Bridgewater Bank. They sent me a long time ago, I don't know, 10 years ago or so, when I first was requesting a commercial loan. They said, well, why don't you send over your personal financial statement? And I was like, what? And he said, I'll send one to you and fill it out and return it to me. So I filled this out, and since that day I've been using this. I just saved it, and I stripped it down of all of their branding information, and I just started using it, and every month I go through and update it, and so it's like a living, working document that I update every month and save previous versions of. So when you pull it up in Excel, it shows up as a 3-tab document, and the first pages are input for your personal information. The third page, or second page really online, or the second tab, is your investment real estate schedule, and then the last is the balance sheet. And I'm not I haven't been educated in accounting or anything formal like that. I know that when I look at a business balance sheet, that can be fairly confusing, and yet this puts it together in numbers that I'm familiar with because they're my own numbers, and it puts everything together in a way that kind of makes sense for me, and at least I've become accustomed to looking at. So that's like the basic walkthrough on this. If you've applied for a mortgage through a regular home loan lender, everything that you have to provide them is basically this. They might have it in a different format. You might be sitting down with them and they take it verbally and then back it up with documentation, and this is the information. And the difference between doing that and working with this document is that when you do it for the purpose of getting a home loan, you do it once and then you probably don't ever see it again, unless you recognize that you're signing it at closing saying, nothing has changed from this, right? Whereas this, when you update it every month, you're getting more and more familiar with it. You're seeing changes that are taking place in your own financial life, and you can start to draw conclusions and make decisions based on what you're seeing showing up on your personal financial statement. So when you see in a magazine or newspaper and say, so-and-so has a net worth of, $30 million or $5 million or $2 million or whatever, that number is taken from this type of a document where somebody goes through and it may not even be them, it might be, you know, somebody who's like kind of appraising them or valuing them or trying to value them, and they're going to go through and do this type of a document for them and figure out, okay, what do they own and what do they owe against it. So as you continue working with it, it's think of it less like a scoreboard, because I mean, who are you really competing against unless you're, you know, trying to be, you know, with Warren Buffett or somebody like that. I mean, it's not really about a score. It's more like a temperature, I think, or like taking your temperature personally and getting a feel for what your financial life is actually doing. So as you go through, as we look on this first page, obviously the personal information at the top, that's pretty self-explanatory. Going in and putting in your income in the income section, knowing the difference between what is salary or what is bonus or commission, or even dividends or interest. I mean, those things can change year to year, likely would change year to year. Any real estate income, alimony, or support, that is, this section is like your incoming cash or earnings area. Then of course they ask you some questions. And then in the bottom section there, schedules, your cash and equivalents, that's balances in your checking accounts, savings accounts, what certificates of deposit, money market funds, baseline investments like that. Mutual funds, I believe, would be in there. Then moving on to the next page, your other marketable securities and retirement accounts, 401ks, bonds. As you go through those, there's an opportunity. It says if pledged to who, and that would be if you used that for collateral to like borrow against your 401k or borrow against a retirement account. That would be having it pledged against. And your personal real estate, you do put your primary residence on here. Something to think about with the personal real estate is, we'll get to that later. Investment real estate. So in this section, they actually they refer to the third page. And we'll get into that in a little bit greater detail in a bit here. But that third page is where you actually put your properties that you don't live in and are generating income otherwise. Business ownership is listed there. Life insurance, if you have a cash surrender value on your life insurance. I know we have one of those that's like I think it's called a variable universal. Yeah, is that right? Am I right, Tony? VUL, I think is what it is, and it doesn't even like trip the meter on my cash value, because we haven't overfunded it. That is an investment vehicle that you can overfund, and it's something that some people do depending on who their financial advisor is or what their plan is. That might be something that people choose to use. Receivables due to me on contracts. That's if maybe you've got contracts for deed out there, or other types of installment income on assets that you own that somebody else is paying you for. I suppose that could probably be auto loans or something like that too, if you had that out there and you were being paid on that type of income or asset, sorry. Then loans owing to banks, and that would be loans outside of your primary residence. So you're using that for maybe lines of credit, balances, that type of thing, what student loans are on there. Just your regular, like the regular installment loans that you have out there. Your other personal property, so this is a section where you have a chance to list your, what people typically refer to as assets. I mean, depending on how you define that, you know, it's maybe debatable whether it really truly is an asset. But it says vehicles, boats, recreational vehicles, jewelry, or other assets. So those things that that do have some value, and then of course, if they do have value and you're making monthly payments on them, you do need to carry that loan up in the prior section. It's what's Schedule H there. Then, so the real estate section. In this section, you're listing out any investment properties you have. We keep track of the purchase price, the maturity date on your loan, any interest rates, loan balances, and then of course it does calculate your equity in the property, which is something that's pretty important for creating that balance sheet at the end. Okay?
So no, not your personal residence in that one, right?
That's
Correct. Not your personal residence in that one. That one is specifically I guess it wouldn't have to be generating an income. We'd like to see it generating an income, but it would be any real estate owned, yeah. So
like the cabin, would you put the cabin in there, or only if you're renting it out?
you know, only if you're renting it out. Yeah, I would put the cabin. That's a good question. I would put the cabin in your personal real estate. So that's personal residence, vacation properties, timeshares. Yeah. So anything that wasn't generating an income, which is kind of an interesting topic too, because if maybe that would be a good place to put something like that, or maybe find a way to shift it from one place to another. And then of course, like we talked about on the last page, then each of those subsections are put together, added up, and you've got an asset column and of course a liability column, okay? The assets minus your liabilities equals your net worth, okay? Any questions on the form itself? Okay? First I started with why. Why a personal financial statement? I've found that when you go talk to a lender, that the lender, especially in a commercial environment, the lender, it's a great way to show the lender what your financial condition is. So they know if by looking at it that they can see that your net worth is a positive number. That means that you're not holding a bunch of assets that you owe more than they're worth, right? On the flip side, if you had a $400,000 house and had a $600,000 loan against it, that's going to tell a different story about your financial state, right? Another reason for the personal financial statement, like we talked about earlier, is to determine for yourself, or use as a measuring stick for yourself, to base your decisions off of, to determine where you are, where you're going. You can set goals based on the numbers in the personal financial statement, and it gives you a way of actually measuring that. So,
Can I just ask point blank?
yeah.
What happens if we're running a negative net right now? How realistic is it to start investing in real estate? How far out are we? How are those kind of things?
Sure. There wouldn't be any reason why you couldn't start investing in real estate right away. You may not be able to go through traditional traditional methods in order to get it. That doesn't that isn't like an absolute answer though, because you could have a negative net worth and be bringing in a solid income, or maybe now you're bringing in a solid income and now you're able to get a loan, because especially the conventional lenders, I guess I haven't taken one in that circumstance, but I wouldn't think that they're as concerned about a negative net worth as would be maybe a commercial lender, where you have a negative net worth that's that way because you have poorly performing in real estate investments, or any other investments for that matter. So, perfect example could be like a medical student comes out of med school, ton of debt, most likely a decent negative net worth, right? Yet high W-2 income, likely coming, probably offset by some by some student loans and stuff, but they're probably still a good candidate for a home loan. So depending on what they bought, maybe that could be it could become investment in real estate. So yeah. Any other questions on that? Shane?
Did you do contract for deeds ever?
That's a great, thanks, I was gonna say that before. Yeah, absolutely. So that could be another way for somebody to get into it. Let's say everybody in the room is not a doctor, right? In fact, none of us are, at least that I know of. You could approach a seller of any property, and depending on that seller's circumstance, you could purchase property on contract for deed from them. You're making your monthly payments to the seller rather than making monthly payments to a bank. They're the ones who are actually lending on that property. We have done that. In that circumstance, the property we bought, we did put 10% down. We used 2.7% of the purchase price of commission toward that 10% down, and we had the seller pay closing costs, so we were like a hard 7.3% into that property, and that ended up being a fantastic property for us to buy. I mean, at the time we did it too, it was a time where they were having a hard time selling it. I mean, I still almost don't understand why. It just maybe wasn't appealing to the mass market, and we didn't even renovate that. We just literally bought it and stuck somebody in there, and 5 years later we refinanced back out. So that was a great way to do it, where you didn't. I mean, we didn't. I guess we needed the money, the cash, to do it, but I don't recall them pulling a credit report on us. I don't know.
That's hilarious.
I know, right? I mean, it's $275,000 house or whatever, they don't pull credit or whatever. And I don't know that their agent was necessarily pushing us to do it. So, what's that?
I just wanted it sold.
Sure. I mean, probably as motivated as the sellers in a way. I mean, and the sellers had bought another house. They were like moved on. So, was there another question? No.
No, I was just gonna say the risk is the seller gets it back if you default on it.
Yeah.
So
I mean, right. I mean, and truly, the risk could be I buy it. I've got $15,000 cash into it, and I trash it on them or something. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I seem like a good gamble.
And you would be doing that if you can't get the financing?
If you couldn't get traditional financing, that could be a way to do it. Maybe that works good for a seller that has, maybe they don't have a need for the money, right? Maybe it's an inherited property or something like that. Could be, somebody who sees that as a way to get a better return than what they can get otherwise in the market. So.
Speaking of that, they would typically charge you a higher interest than what you'd get with the lender, right?
Yeah, in yes, and not necessarily. I mean, I've seen them where they're charging like 0 or 2% or like very low numbers because they wanted the installment income. They weren't financially savvy. They were looking at it in terms of like that creating that consistent income. So we've sold properties on contract for deed as well. On the flip side, we've sold a couple properties that way, and as a contract holder, that works pretty well too. It's similar to owning a rental property, and yet I don't have any of the responsibility. They've got money into the game, and in the end, I've got a loan behind it anyway, so I really don't have much money, if any, out of my pocket in. I'm just like making a profit on that margin, or the spread in the interest rates, because I do charge. Like I think ours were at like 7.5 or 8, and I think we were borrowing at like 5 or something like that. So there's a spread there, yeah. And when I do it, I have one that I think we have a 25-year amortization on, and I think our buyer is on an interest only. So it's like we're making a bigger margin every month as we go forward too. So yeah.
How do you get by the due on sale clause with your current lender?
Because they're not conventional loans, we haven't had a problem with that. So we made our commercial lender aware of it, and they were willing to do it. So if any of you ever have any buyers that can't get a traditional loan, I would consider holding a contract for deed. I do require a decent amount down. I don't do like 10% down. I have to have like 25% down.
Maybe.
But it works. I mean, it works in certain circumstances for the right buyers. They have a bunch of cash, maybe just have, maybe they went through a bad divorce or bankruptcy or something like that. They could be a good person to lend to. So, was there one other question or no? I was thinking somebody else said something. No. Okay. So, a couple things that I've learned in looking through this is, I think, would everybody agree that a car is a bad investment? I mean, for 99.9% of cars, right? Like, we might be able to go buy some vintage Ferrari that's appreciating, and that might be about it. I just heard it on the radio the other day about investing in a car. And while you're spending money on it, it's not an investment. And I don't know that necessarily enough people think of it that way. And I wanted to touch on it because on the personal financial statement, it's something that I've seen where I put my vehicle in, and you put your value in, and you put in the loan amount, down payment, and everything, and
New racing tires.
right. I'm not even gonna talk about that. And so I put it in, and then I haven't touched it for 6 months because I kind of don't even think about that page on the personal financial statement very much. And then I'll go through and I pull a Kelley Blue Book value on it, and I'm like, oh, well, that's great. It's actually worth less, and not only is it worth less now, I'm actually like in kind of a worse position on it than I was 6 months ago anyway, because not only has the value decreased, and I haven't like paid down as much on that loan proportionately as I maybe thought I was. So it's kind of an ugly game, and I guess I don't necessarily have an opinion on paying cash for a vehicle. I suppose it probably makes sense to some. I don't know. I guess I would just be conscious of what that's doing.
I mean, there's hardly any interest on it though. Like I look at my payment.
For
I'm
sure.
paying like $15 a month in interest.
For sure.
It's crazy.
It is.
I mean, it sucks for cash flow.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. You're right. you're right though, and I think when, you look at it, I think it's the depreciating part of it that kills it. It's not necessarily like the amortization of the loan, because you're right, like car loans, I mean, can,
Less than 1%.
yeah, I mean, 5 would be really high,
Yeah.
right? And like,
3 would be high.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think they're even charging hardly anything.
yeah, and the fact that when you literally, like when you drive it off the lot, it might be worth $10,000 less that day, depending on the vehicle, or depending on how good of a deal you get on the front end too, right? Yeah, I know. I guess I don't know why. I just think it's kind of brutal, and to me, it's kind of one of those costs of life. Especially for us, we do have to get around, so you're going to have some sort of a vehicle.
Are we gonna talk about your rentals today?
Yes, a little bit.
Like your plan and process?
More as it relates to the personal financial statement. Yeah. I wanted to talk next about the impact of traditional financial investments. And I would say that when it's something that I track less consistently than my real estate investments, and yet everybody might have a different rub on that. If you're investing in the markets, I don't know that there's anything you can do to control what is happening with that, other than maybe buying and selling stocks and such, and certainly that's something that you can do. And to me, I think it feels as though that's as connected to the general market overall, or maybe the U.S. economy versus anything that is more controllable. Impact of a house. When you, yes.
Can I go to that real quick? Just
Of
because
course.
a lot of these people a lot of us are in real estate and don't have like the traditional 401k and all those kind of things.
Yeah.
Is that part of your financial strategy? Or do you really look towards investing in real estate as that?
So we do have we have previous 401ks and Roth and like traditional financial investments, let's say. We do have some, and they were generated from previous working lives or Tara's current job. And we are invested in that to the extent that we're taking advantage of a 401k match, and that's it, yeah. Which I think anybody would agree that, like, to get that part of the benefit is wise. I mean, you should really read some books and maybe listen to some podcasts and try to get some other opinions on that. One of the things that has swayed me away from a traditional investing model is that in a traditional investing model, it is created for an employee. And if you're not an employee, I don't know that it necessarily makes sense. And I'm not aiming for 65 years old or 63 years old. That isn't where I'm looking to stop working. So if I were using those traditional investment tools, they don't have like, unless I'm using a non-tax advantaged tool, I'm not going to have the chance to stop working at 50 or 52 or whatever. They are dependent on getting you to the point where, I mean, honestly, like hope you don't die, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that would suck. So, yeah, that's not really a good part. So what we looked at was when looking at the real estate investing, a beautiful part of it is that we can create cash flow immediately. Whether we choose to use it or not is our decision, and each of the properties we've purchased does have immediate cash flow that we can use however we see fit. So if you look at an investment in a house, if it's your house, I hear people go back and forth on whether or not it really truly is an investment if it's your house that you live in, because it's not giving you a return unless you sell it, or potentially created some equity and borrowed against that and then used that to create some income.
Home office right out with depreciation.
Sure, you could do that. I don't know if that's gonna get you to retirement.
14 home offices, I can't think.
Right. Have a lot of kids. Because there isn't an income associated with that property to offset the money that you're putting into it. So it's, for most, it's an expense, and it's just an expense. It gives you the benefit of somewhere to live, somewhere to, raise a family, everything else. I mean, it's a part of your overall life picture, certainly. And I think people are setting themselves up for disappointment if they think of it as anything other than maybe a long-term wealth building tool. Wealth building, I don't know if it's wealth, like a long-term asset.
That's what I was gonna ask.
Yeah.
Do you consider it just like equivalent to a bank? It's a place you put money and it stays there?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Especially with the way that the tax system is set up, that you can sell your primary residence when you get to a point where maybe you no longer need that large house. Then you can sell it, maybe downsize, and then use some of that money as retirement income, or I guess it wouldn't be income, but use that as retirement money. And I guess that's one of the other parts about a traditional investing model that I struggled with too, was the idea that if I save up all this money, and save it up, and then as the minute I stop working, either that has to produce enough cash flow as interest, or I have to start digging at that pool of money that I created. And that's where I struggled with it too, because the second you start scooping away from it, presumably that's getting smaller, than the interest income that you're gaining off of it is getting smaller as well.
Have you looked at converting your Roth to a self-directed Roth?
Yes, we did.
You did do that?
We looked at it. Yeah. We looked at it and didn't do it, simply because we didn't feel like we needed it. We really haven't needed it yet, right? We were able to do what the other things that we've been working on, we've been able to do them without doing it yet. We've got.
Because you can still add to it. We've been doing part of that as part of our strategy to still contribute to it. You just have to do a conversion every year.
So you're investing into the Roth and then using the
I
Roth.
invest into some other retirement, post-tax retirement. So I do, now I think we can do $6,000 a year.
Okay.
Or 6,500 or something a year per person. And you put that into post-tax retirement, and then you just convert it to a Roth, just because we don't qualify to contribute to a Roth.
Got it. So when you say post-tax, it's post-tax dollars that you're putting into it.
Yeah.
And it will not be taxed again.
Right. So the cool
Okay.
part is
Yeah.
my understanding is you can go invest in anything.
Correct.
Like, that's how some of these extremely wealthy people have, created incredible wealth. So we looked at it like, well, if we could find an investment that has the potential for creating a 30 to 40 times return,
Right?
I mean, what a gigantic windfall if there's no tax on that coming back in.
Absolutely.
So we invested in a few things that seemed like they could have that possibility.
And when,
But then also you buy a rental property or you buy some property with it,
right?
whatever it appreciates to, and the cash flow, it's all tax free.
And when you use that, so to keep it simple, if you purchased a property with that and that creates cash flow, so it's creating a return, then the return goes back to the Roth.
Yeah, it can't come out until we're of whatever retirement age.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Otherwise, we'd have to pay tax.
Correct.
Penalty or whatever.
Penalty, right? Does everybody understand that?
Yeah, but you keep it in that business, you go create a business with your Roth.
Yes.
And then the money just stays in that, and then, you get to a point where you can refi that property, and then you just stick it back in there, you can buy another one. But it's
Yeah.
all
Right?
tax free.
Right. I've talked to a couple people who are doing, they're flipping houses using Roth money, which is pretty cool.
That would help.
Yeah. I mean, it's a way to continue putting it together and doing it in a way that's very, very tax advantage, right? I mean, yeah.
And then, sorry, the disadvantage there is just the age, like if you're a certain age, it has to exist for a certain time to withdraw, or is that a?
Well, it's basically like you sticking into a retirement account that you're not gonna take out of it, cause you gotta pay a 10% penalty.
Okay,
So it's just like whatever you're putting, it's just an active
Just
investment strategy that's retirement dollars.
Gotcha.
Right.
That's the only way you look at it.
And so there could be you said a 10% penalty for early withdrawal?
I think-
Something?
I think
There's
something like that.
There's some sort of a penalty for early withdrawal, and if you needed it, I don't know that would necessarily, I mean, it would certainly be nice to have, right? And do you have full access to 100% of it at the retirement age? Like, you could just go dig at it, or don't know?
I haven't gotten there yet, I don't know.
Something to ask. I'd be curious to know, if it's $10 million, if you can just go nail your 10 million all at once, or if it's then spread out over a series of payments, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Interesting. That's a pretty neat idea, though. Yeah. So potentially the impact of a house that somebody else pays for, which takes us over to the real estate section. A great part of that is that you can get into that environment in a very leveraged way, right? You can borrow money to get there, and the tenant of your property or the user of your property, whoever's paying you to use it, I guess it wouldn't have to be a residential property. The tenant, though, is paying down your mortgage and supposedly, or maybe not supposedly, but should be creating cash flow for you on a monthly basis. And I mean, that's what our strategy has been, to continue to buy those properties one at a time, basically. And when we buy them, each time we buy them, they're creating $200 to $500, $600, $700 of cash flow per property, depending on what the circumstance is. And they're paying for themselves, one, and they're also giving me cash flow, but they're also appreciating. We're getting the benefit of loan principal reduction on the loans each time, or every month, I should say. And that's probably the one of the larger things that I recognized here maybe a couple years ago. Was when I recognized it first, is that the cumulative effect of principal reduction over numerous loans all at once. And it's pretty cool to look on any loan and say, okay, well, we paid down $400 this month or $500 this month. I mean, it's great, right? That the whole point. I mean, the 30-year loan is a long loan, so it's great. It's great to to know that you're chipping away at it a little bit, right? When you spread that over, 10, 15, 20 properties, it starts to become a very big number. And then when I looked at it on a monthly basis, that was cool. And then when I looked at it on a yearly basis, I thought, well, that's awesome. That's like another full-time paying job.
It's hard to save that amount of money.
Oh,
I mean,
well, and to save it, you would have to save time and a half. You'd have to earn time and a half.
if not double.
Yeah, if not double to get there, right? Because that's over and above any money that you're making otherwise. Yeah, you're right. I mean, it would be very, very difficult to do so.
Being leveraged like that, like 2008, right? 2000.
Yeah.
What happens if there's a 2008 again for you
Yeah.
in your current?
Yeah, so it's a good question and something that I wouldn't say I've been scared of. It's a thought I've had, and I have a regret tied to it because my banker, who passed away a couple of years ago, he owned and had assembled a nice portfolio of properties right before the collapse, and I meant to ask him like what his takeaways from that were, and I didn't get to ask him, so I didn't get the firsthand experience to know. To me, I think when I look at it, I think you have to be in a position where you're not so over leveraged that you're going to be like taken down by any one thing. And certainly, if I look at properties across the board, I want to see enough cash flow from a property that if things did turn pretty significantly worse in the economy, that maybe I'm not cash flowing $300 a month anymore. Maybe I'm just breaking even. And I think if you asked everybody in 2008, like, would you take breaking even right now? They'd all absolutely, right? And I think that's certainly something. I mean, right now rents are as high as they've ever been, right? I mean, so are property values. And with rents as high as they are right now, I think it's something you do have to be conscious of. And yet, I think another thing that people got into then, and there might be people really into it now, I'm not, is way over their head as far as the potential loan amount, or not even the potential loan amount, but the loan amount against their property. And I saw in many cases that there were multiple properties owned by somebody who couldn't afford to carry them all, and for whatever reason, wasn't able to make it work with renters. I think there was probably some panic selling too that went on, and people kind of giving up or saying, I'm not going to ride it out, or I'm not going to spend my money to do it. Whereas if they would have maybe approached it a little bit more creatively, it might have been possible. And heck, I don't know. Maybe they didn't need to. I mean, the way loans are right now, there's plenty of people buying houses right now that had to ditch properties then. So yeah. And I know from a commercial banker's perspective too, they don't look at. I don't think they look at people's failed business ventures as like a death sentence for people. I don't think. I think they would be willing to lend to them again if the people created the right set of circumstances for the bank to lend to. Yeah. What other questions do you have?
So the rents are at an all-time high and the values of the homes are at an all-time high. Those rents will go down.
The rents may go down.
May go down with the values of the.
Yeah.
When you look in the last 20 years, has there been a time where they've gone down? in that period?
I think from like 2007 to 2010, I think they did go down. I don't know that it was so noticeably that it caused a big problem.
Yeah, I didn't notice it on any of mine. I didn't have any change.
Our first other property was in 2010, so if anything, I might have been like too far on the back end of it to like really. Although I guess my first other property was a short sale, and my second other property was a foreclosure. So I guess it was kind of right in the heart of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But because I owned a whole, like 2 townhomes and a house from 2007 through that whole period of time, didn't really do much of anything until 2015 with the one.
Yeah.
The rents all stayed steady, like if you caught it in the wrong time, I think it maybe affected it by a tiny little bit. But
Sure.
Not even $100 a month, you know, so if you're cash flowing $500 to $700 a month,
Right.
so what?
That
It's fine.
and $500 to $700. That isn't my average. That's a number.
It's a
Like
nice one.
we do have $500 to $700 on a couple, and that isn't like the standard. It's
That's
What would you say the average is?
probably 450, 4 to 450. Yeah, if you look, I don't know. Yeah, we've got a couple. Like we have a couple properties that we did our system on that just don't work the same as some of the other ones. And we just sold one last summer that was like that. And, I mean, we own the house across the street and are essentially into the house across the street for the same type of number, and the one just didn't work. Like we were making $75 a month on that one and $350 on one across the street, and it didn't make any sense. The one we're doing worse on, we rented for more. So I mean, it just like a combination of effects.
Was that just layout or demographic house or what?
High insurance and high taxes,
Huh.
right?
Why would the insurance be different if the house is
I don't know.
weird?
You tell me. I mean, we fought it. We pushed it with our broker. We tried different brokers. The city, the one that was we were getting hurt on in taxes, that the exterior of that house was painted really nice. So, and the city did have it valued higher. But I mean, literally the only difference between the two houses was the exterior. Like the only difference. They're like couldn't like when we did the first house, I stood in the front living room of the one house. I'm like, that house is exactly like this one. And then 2 months later, they ended up reaching out to us and we bought it from them. So it was just kind of a weird circumstance.
What city was that?
Plymouth. Yeah, Plymouth.
Can I ask another leverage question?
Yes.
How many months should you be able to cover without a renter in there? Like, what is
Your reserves?
yeah, like to feel in case, I mean, your renter goes, I'm out,
Right.
you know?
Right. I'll give you a couple of answers. So one, for qualification purposes, especially on your first or second extra home, the bank wants to see you have 6 months of carrying cost. So that's one answer. I had
Is that under Fannie and Freddie or is that under commercial lender?
that's Fannie and Freddie.
Okay.
That's Fannie and Freddie, yeah.
And that's just the first one?
Like the first or second additional home, yeah. Like so, if you own a house and then you say, okay, I want to buy another house, at least they made us at that time. They made us qualify for that second house and be able to carry that house for 6 months without a tenant in it. And I think at that time we were able to use assets like 401k and retirement and that type of thing, like something you could draw from if we needed to as
The carrying.
yeah, I forget what they call it, but and that was something that was kind of a unique or kind of a different thing. I think my longest vacancy was a month and a half, and a large part of that was my fault. We had a house that didn't show very well. It wasn't clean. It was even priced a little bit high, And, you know, I take full responsibility for that one not renting. Most of our other properties are rented, I would say there's no more vacancy than 2 weeks. And most of our properties, to the tune of 75% plus, are rented before the people ever move out. Like they're rented with the current tenants in place, and so we might have a day to turn over the house. Most of the time, it's just like people moving out on the 31st, and next people moving in on the 1st. So, I mean, most of the time it's that way. Like realistically, it just hasn't ended there. So across last year, as an example, I think last year was a bad example because we had a duplex vacant for a long time. Yeah, I would say year before last what is 20, like 17 times 12, whatever that is in total months, we probably had 4 months of vacancy in all of those. So was that over 200 months or something? Yeah, yeah. So that I mean, of that, it just has never been that big of a thing. And that was my biggest fear going in, right? Like, well, I don't have $2,000 to be paying for another house, and yet that's probably been the thing that has been least troublesome as we've gotten into it more and more. Yeah.
So like when you're looking for your investment properties, are you taking, vacancy rate into account when you're doing your initial numbers to see if it's gonna work?
Yeah, and we do, and I mean, what do I use? I think it's on my spreadsheet. I think it's 5% vacancy. It hasn't been that way. You know, the one circumstance that happened last year that I was referring to before was a duplex at the University of Minnesota. We completed our construction in January, and students moved in September.
Yep.
So bad timing on our part. Probably should have pushed hard to get somebody in there for some period of time, and yet we didn't want to get people in there temporarily and screw up our ability to get the big rent when the big rent was coming up soon.
So like getting a mortgage, are you always looking at like a 30 or a 15 or does not matter, or 20 years? Is there things that you consider when you look into that?
Sure.
And paying it down?
Sure. So with our properties, if I've been able to get a conventional loan, which I think we only have like 4 conventional loans, all of those are 30-year loans, and I'm using those as a tool to generate the highest cash flow possible. Because the loans that are conventional loans, they're the longest term loans, they're probably gonna be your lowest interest rates, so your payments are going to be the lowest. So then I use those as a tool, right? It's not as great for pay down of those loans specifically. And when I look at the whole portfolio globally, I have other loans that are 20-year loans and 25-year loans. Most of the commercial loans are shorter term loans, 15, 20, 25-year loans. And, or they're based on that amortization anyway. Most of our commercial loans are actually like 5 or 10-year loans, but they're based on the amortization of a 15, 20, or 25-year loan. So we take the cash flow from the loans that are longer term and use that cash flow to pay down the principal on actually and we take the one that's actually the lowest, because that's the one that we can pay off first. Okay? So the lowest, or take your pick. We chose, the first one that we paid off was the lowest loan amount. The next one we started working on happened to be the loan with the worst terms. We had one that was like a 20-year term, and because of that 20-year term, the cash flow on that one wasn't quite as good.
So now the ones that you paid off are completely paid off and in your...
Right. So when we pay them off, yeah. So a couple things happen. When you pay them off, then of course your balance in your net worth goes up, and then it also creates more cash flow because when you no longer have that debt obligation, you know, yeah, and it's pretty significant when that happens.
Then do you ever borrow against them to get the money to put down on the other house?
Yes, we
Yeah.
do. So we've used them as almost as like a short-term credit card. So we'll use them to purchase another property, and then when we do our rehab project on that next property, then we do our rehab project, then we refinance it after that, pull our money back out, and then pay that credit card off. I'll call it a credit card just for the simplicity. We pay that off then, and that's been a pretty good way to do it. Yeah, I mean, at least for us. The thing that's great about doing it that way is when you borrow against them, it's typically an interest-only environment.
Kind of like a line of credit. I mean,
It is a line of credit, yeah, it is a line of credit, and it's low. It's low interest rate. It's like 5.5%, 6%. It's prime plus 1 or something like that, or
credit card is not.
Yeah, no, I know it is. It's like a third of the cost of a credit card. Yeah, at least. Yeah, and it's very, very cheap money in the world of like money that you can just go out and use for anything. You can use it, you take it and get cash for it, and it's very cheap money in that regard. So, yeah. What other questions are there? 2 minutes.
What do we need to do before we come to the next class?
Awesome question. Thanks for asking.
That's just.
It's almost like you know. So, for the next class, I'd like to have everybody fill out their personal financial statement, and don't use this one, even though I'm holding it up in the air. Use the one that Wendy made available.
Spreadsheet.
Yeah, the spreadsheet that Wendy emailed it out, and then
Yeah.
we'll also put it on the.
And you need to download that.
Yeah, we'll do it on the
Yeah.
office's Facebook page too, in the forums there, or I think it's in the forums, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll put it there, and
And complete this before we come.
you wanna complete it before you come, and we can then use it as information for the future, and if you keep it updated, I guarantee you're gonna learn things from it that you don't currently know about your money. And I think it's very instructive, and it, for me, when I did it, it opened my eyes immediately to a negative net worth, which was negative, right? That's not good. And it opened my eyes to, that I needed to work on that, right? And it's like anything else, if you don't know what's wrong, you're not gonna just start fixing it without knowing how to go about it, or even like that, you need to work on it. So, that is your entry into next week, or next month.
What's the topic for next month then? Just kind of curious.
Gosh, you guys are like right on my list here, that's so awesome. Next month, Perry Hirth is going to talk about wealth building through profit share. And we said third Tuesday, is that what we said?
Yeah.
I'm looking at you, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yep, the third Tuesday, no, the third Thursday.
Third Thursday.
The third Thursday.
So I thought it was
No,
only
that's
Thursday
that's
this
luxury.
week. Tuesday is every other,
Yeah,
that's what you
Yeah,
guys
so
originally
just-
said.
Is it Tuesday or Thursday? Because the 18th would be the third Tuesday.
I thought this was the only Thursday.
yeah.
This is the
yeah.
only Thursday, yeah,
It will
right,
be on
it's
the
always
week.
Tuesdays.
We'll make sure it goes out in an office
Right.
message, sorry, yeah.
Good call.
That,
'Cause it's an
Perry's
issue.
teaching next month because I won't be here, and the month after that in March is rental property analysis, and we're gonna get into multiple specific properties, we'll say. We'll teach you what I'm looking at with it, and we'll run it from the basic version to like the full-blown Excel version. So hopefully we can do that with our smart board.
Wouldn't that be cool? That'd be so cool.
Kevin, your turn.
We have a smart board?
No, we don't have a smart board? All that, but, I'm
Do
gonna
we, and then,
unpack myself.
and then do you always do you always usually have to have 20% down on a conventional loan that you would be buying for an investment property unless you buy a contract for deed? Well, I mean, most contract for deeds are that much too.
Maybe,
Maybe, you
maybe.
don't know, okay.
So,
That's up to who your commercial banker and stuff like that.
on a commercial loan, we need to put down 25%
25%.
on our commercial loans. On the conventional loans, we've not put down 20% on any conventionally purchased property. I think we put down 10% a couple times, and I know we put down 5% one time too. And
Okay.
that, I guess that would be a great thing to talk about too, is like in the process of buying the next property, we, rather than purchasing a property as an investment property, which changes the criteria a little bit for your lender, if you purchase that next property as your own property, then turn the house that you're currently living in into an investment property, it can work a little bit smoother.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say that again?
Yeah, rather than buying an investment property, buy your next primary residence and rent out your existing primary
So they're
residence.
both under residential.
Yeah, because they're both under conventional conforming loans. You're gonna get 30-year mortgage financing, low interest rate,
Lower down payment.
lower down payment. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can buy your next one on an FHA and or 5% down conventional. I know when we bought our first additional property that was on a 5% down conventional, that again, we took 2.7% commission on that, so I was into it for 2.3%. Had the seller pay closing costs, so I got 3% in seller pays, and we paid our PMI up front. Because we had a good credit score at that time, we paid our PMI up front. I think it cost us like $3,500 out of pocket to pay our PMI up front, and it saved us like $160 a month. So our recapture on it was something like 16 months. It was crazy how big of a difference it made. And to this day, it still keeps that property in a place that it's cash flowing positively to the tune of, I don't know, it's maybe $300 a month, but we've had the same renters in there now for like 8 years, 7 years. They're in their third 3-year lease, so
Wow.
yeah, I haven't been there in like 6 years.
And they have zero ownership.
They have zero ownership, yeah.
Isn't
Yeah.
that crazy?
Yeah, I know.
It's interesting though, because my CPA that I used to use, he's retired now. He didn't see a home as an investment tool, so he never bought a home, and it just blew us away that,
Yeah.
he didn't look at it as that, he looked at it as an expense, and so.
Right.
It's just a different
Well,
mindset.
and I think it's a good point, Carla, because that might be the difference between looking at your own home as an investment versus owning a home that somebody else pays for. That is an investment. Most accountants are going to look at that and be like, well, yeah, and at least our accountant gets excited about having us come in because we have all kinds of weird crap going on, and he's like, well, this is fun because it's not just like the normal stuff. So, and there's all sorts of tax benefits to investing in real estate, and great write-offs to the point that, it really makes a lot of sense. So.
Are you gonna be talking about that at some point in this?
We are. Let me just run down. Next month is Perry with Wealth Building through Profit Share. That's going to be an awesome class. March is rental property analysis. April, developing an investment real estate plan that makes sense. May, scaling your rental business to create bigger results. June, I set a plan for a couple agent investors. July, we'll talk about flipping. August, buy, rehab, rent, refi, and repeat, which is what I've been doing for 7 or 8 years now. September, we'll talk about house hacking, which is cool and exciting and a great opportunity for, maybe younger people, or it could be a cool opportunity to get into a house that would otherwise be unaffordable. October, using 1031 tax deferred exchanges. So, I would say probably in October, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the tax stuff too. Maybe next month too, or in March, where we're talking about analysis. Maybe we'll touch on it a little bit. There's some pretty cool tax stuff that happens that basically eliminates any financial liability. Like, you don't have a tax liability because of we don't have a tax liability on the money that comes in on the rental property. So, thanks guys.
Alright, this is where I do one thing.
Yes.
So Derek has said you don't have to show me your your personal financial statement or anything. However, when we first talked about, I remember how important you said that we have to do. So even though there's not accountability on having to show it, we have to do it.
Yeah. Thank you. I think it's super important for everybody to do it, because no matter where you are, and I think that could be the justification for not wanting to do it, like, really. And I think it makes a lot of sense, because all of us have a car, right? And that, when you see consistently what that does, and I probably look hypocritical if you're saying that, because when you look at what that does, you're learning from that. You're learning from it when you look at what any of the other tools do, and then after we talk about what a rental property can do performance-wise, then you can translate that into look at it in your own personal financial statement and see, okay, that's like believable, understandable, like you can see where it could be. Then we can take it and say, okay, well, that's where it is now. What if I just do nothing else other than just hold on to this? What does it look like in 10 years or 5 years? And that's where it gets really cool, because you're not doing anything. I mean, not doing that much.
So awesome.
Cool.
Thanks, Derek.
Thanks, guys.